Bismillah. This is Field Notes Occupation, a Noble Savagery production. I'm Dr. Zara Khan. In today's episode, we are going to be looking at water, healthcare, and refugee camps. This is the village of Jayus. In the village of Jayus, one really finds the water war that Israel is imposing upon the occupied territories. You see in the distance there the primitive and early days of construction of the so-called security fence. Israel calls it the security fence. Others call it the apartheid wall. When we were there, it was simply a barbed wire, 3 layers of barbed wire. But in the years after our visit in 2003, this fence would become electrified, concretized. It would have security outposts built in every couple of meters, and built-in sniper towers. On the other side of this fence, on this side are the people of Jayus, and on the other side are their farms, their fertile land, as well as the 7 water wells that Jayus has had. Jayus has always been known as a very fertile place, and was very well known for its olives and avocados, its apples, pears, plums, and peaches, citrus, clementine, almond trees, and other nuts. And that was largely thanks to the 7 water wells that one finds in Jayus. But because of the security fence and the strategic way in which it's constructed, the Palestinian people are cut off from their water supply. The security fence was supposed to follow the Green Line, the 1967 Green Line that was agreed upon, but in the course of the construction of the fence, concretizing the border between the West Bank and Israel, Israel actually took 42% more land than was agreed upon. So in the village of Jayus, because of the water supply that it had, it also historically provided water to the neighboring city of Kalkilia. We spoke with a 16-year-old boy, we'll call him Muhammad, and you can't see from the quality of the photograph here, but what we saw with our own eyes were the scars and bruising on his face. He had crossed the security fence. There are holes that people have made in parts of the fence, and he had crossed over to his father's farm to get to some water, as well as to get to some of the vegetation on his father's farm. He was caught by Israeli soldiers, and he was beat by them, and he received some blows to the face with the back of one of their rifles. This is Muhammad and one of his friends. We met in Jayus a man who would be our local guide, and he is a Britisher whose name was Daoud, and he, in his own words, became Palestinian. He had traveled to the West Bank and ended up never leaving. And Daoud is a worker with Project Hope, which is a non-governmental organization funded by the Near East Research and Development Center, and with the help of the Canadian Development Foundation, their NGO helped to bring computers, educational resources, and telecasts to the children and the students in the West Bank. Daoud told us that as a resident of Jayus, he receives water 2 times a week for 2 hours each, on Mondays and Wednesdays. Once, when there was a faulty pump, there was no water for 10 days. Now, the people who live in Jayus, they construct and acquire water tanks to put on top of their rooftops to collect rainwater to help alleviate the needs of the water in between the rations that are provided twice weekly. The cost of replacing a damaged tank for their rooftops at that time in 2003 was 350 Israeli shekel, or $70 US at the time. It was a very common practice, we were told and we were shown, for Israeli soldiers to pass by streets and neighborhoods and shoot up the water tanks that people had on top of their roofs. Many of the children in Jayus had sweat sores all over the body, particularly on their backs, for lack of access to bathing water enough times a week. In the village of Jayus, the people had applied for a permit to drill and open up a water well, and as of 2003, they still had not received permission. They were constantly refused that permit. Under occupied living, under Israeli occupation, Palestinians need permits for just about everything, and are often denied. They can't plant a tree without a permit. and these permits are more often than not denied. The closest Israeli settlement to Jayus is Sofin. It's about half a kilometer away, and it was strategically built around a water supply and within the proximity of a water supply. So, and this can all be seen with the naked eye when you are in the West Bank and you are traversing some of the streets and neighborhoods and gazing upon the hilltops where the settlements are built. You can see that the Israeli settlements from far away, they present with lush vegetation, with front lawns and backyards with lawns, as well as swimming pools. And so the way that the water is being stolen and appropriated and redirected is in order for Israeli settlers to enjoy lawns and swimming pools, and then the Palestinian people who are cut off from their water supply and given these meager rations, they have sweat sores, and even their water tanks are shut up, the ones that try to collect rainwater. Here we see some children playing with grenade scraps, shrapnel, and bullet casings that they've collected, left behind by Israeli soldiers during various, raids or operations or sieges that take place in their city. We visited a nursery in Hebron, and this nursery, run by the Union of Palestinian Women, was attacked with Israeli grenades and tear gas. Israeli soldiers did know that on the second floor of this particular building there was a nursery with babies and very small children. We saw the bullet holes in the walls. They came in from the windows and were lodged in the walls. By the grace of God, no children were harmed during this time. The Union of Health Work Committee we visited in Beit Sahur, which is close to Bethlehem, and we spoke with Dr. Majid Nasser, an internist who had been under house arrest for 32 months. The union and the clinic began in 1985, and it provides outpatient emergency and surgical services. Dr. Nasser told us that they have to stay prepared for emergencies within emergencies. That is, that if the social landscape experiences things like curfews, demolitions, and mass arrests, well then what type of pressure and strain does that put on healthcare providers in the services that they are trying to provide people? Healthcare, said Dr. Nasser, is deeply and directly connected to movements of social change. Earlier in 2003, in the month of April, there had been an invasion in Nablus, and ambulance drivers were shot at and killed. 67 ambulances had been destroyed in April of that year. The major issue is dialysis patients, we're told. Their fluids ran out and the patients were not able to be transported. Israel prevented the passage of clearly marked ambulances, which again is in violation of international law. The next day, the Health Work Committee's clinic in Nablus's Old City was attacked. We visited the clinic and the attack point, and what we saw, the HWC had been expanding its community hospital, and at this point it had 19 permanent beds. It had been besieged in the middle of the day by Israeli soldiers. It had to evacuate patients. The staff were made to lay down on the ground face down at gunpoint. The Israeli soldiers connected the doors of the clinic with fuse wire, and then in a series of detonations blew up the doors with explosives. A result of this particular attack on the UHC clinic in Nablus was cardiology, ultrasound, and other machines were broken and damaged. We were told that Israeli intelligence knows that this particular center services poor people. The largest part of the people who they service are women with anemia. Other social conditions that affect the Palestinian health crisis: 70% live underneath the poverty line because of the broken economy and the kind of immobility, so that goods and services cannot be transported due to curfews and checkpoints. 65% of working capacity people are unemployed. So those capable of working, 65% of them are unemployed. 25% suffer from some form of malnutrition. And when we asked Dr. Nasser about the really high rate of 9-year-old, 10-year-old children who we saw smoking since we got to the West Bank, he told us that children suffer from very high levels of stress, and they have no activity to participate in. Schools are often closed because of closures and curfews, and so children don't have a regular school routine, and that this leads a lot of them to start smoking as early as 9 and 10 years old. There is extremely high trauma in Palestine, extremely high PTSD and ADD among children. Here, some of the children who followed us into the clinic when we were going to visit it were showing us the pieces of broken machinery that they had collected. Refugee camps are a very central part of the situation under military occupation. The story of refugees and their experiences, this is something that is largely ignored by the international community, by Arab countries, and by segments of the Palestinian leadership itself. We are repeatedly told that the right of return of refugees is the key to Middle East peace. Nakba, 1948, the disaster, the catastrophe, brought about the Dheisha Refugee Camp, which we visited just outside Bethlehem. The Dheisha Refugee Camp is made up of residents who were expelled from 45 neighboring villages in and around western Jerusalem and west of Hebron. So a very large population coming from a very large area in total. It was a very harsh winter in 1948, and in December of 1949, the United Nations Working Group established the Dheisha Refugee Camp, replacing the tents with small units in May of 1950. Each room was given to one family, and it was 9 square meters with one window. The entire camp had 2 toilets, one male and one female, per 25 rooms. So for every 25 rooms, and remember each room is one whole family, there was one set of bathrooms, one male and one female. In 1985, the Israeli military completely enclosed Dheisha Refugee Camp with a fence so that it was completely encircled and encaged. This continued the start of the first Intifada 2 years later. The fence that the Israeli military built around Dheisha Refugee Camp in 1985 was 8 meters high. It had 3 layers, barbed wire fence and corrugated metal. It was like living in a zoo, we were told. Foreign nationals would come and visit and look inside. And of course, these remarks are especially important given that we've just heard from the Israeli defense minister and the prime minister himself how Palestinians are not to be considered full human persons, but more animalistically. And so what was happening in Dheisha in the 80s and the 90s was a testament that that mindset of not viewing the full personhood of Palestinian people was actively in effect as they were encircled in this quote-unquote human zoo. There was only one gate for the entire camp, and it had 2 turnstiles. In December of 1995, the 10-year fence was finally destroyed, and this was as a result of Israel withdrawing from Bethlehem because of the Oslo Accords in 1993. To this day, a part of the fence remains in order to commemorate and remember and serve as a memorial for this very dark moment in Dheisha Refugee Camp's history.